A battleship is a large armored warship with a main battery consisting of large-caliber guns. It dominated naval warfare in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Battleships were a symbol of naval dominance and national might, and for decades the battleship was a major factor in both diplomacy and military strategy. A global arms race in battleship construction began in Europe in the 1890s and ended with the end of World War II. Though the increasing importance of the aircraft carrier meant that the battleship played a less important role than had been expected in that conflict. And today's top will feature the 5 largest battleships in history. By the way, I want to note that sister ships will not be included in this top, because they practically do not differ from the presented ships. Enjoy watching. 5th place takes Battleship Roma, named after 2 previous ships in the city of Rome. Was the 3rd Littorio-class battleship of Italy's Royal Navy. Roma was commissioned into the Regia Marina on the 14th of June 1942, but a severe fuel shortage in Italy at that time prevented her from being deployed. Instead, along with her sister ships Vittorio Veneto and Littoria, she was used to bolster the anti-aircraft defenses of various Italian cities. In this role, she was severely damaged twice in June 1943 from bomber raids on La Spezia. After repairs in Genoa through all of July and part of August, Roma was deployed as the flagship of Admiral Carlo Bergamini in a large battle group that eventually comprised the 3 Littorios, 8 cruisers and 8 destroyers. The battle group was scheduled to attack the Allied ships approaching Salerno to invade Italy on the 9th of September 1943, but the news of the 8th of September 1943 armistice with the Allies led to the operation being cancelled. The Italian fleet was instead ordered to sail to Sardinia and subsequently to Malta to surrender to the Allies. While the force was in the Strait of Bonifacio, Dornier Do 217 seconds of the German Luftwaffe Specialist Wing KG-100, armed with Fritz X radio-controlled bombs, sighted the force. The first attack failed, but the second dealt Italia and Roma severe damage. The hit on Roma caused water to flood 2 boiler rooms in the aft engine room, leaving the ship to limp along with 2 propellers, reduced power, and arc-induced fires in the stern of the ship. Shortly thereafter, another bomb slammed into the ship and detonated within the forward engine room, causing catastrophic flooding and the explosion of the No. 2 main turret's magazines, throwing the turret itself into the sea. Sinking by the bow and listing to starboard, Roma capsized and broke in 2, carrying 1,393 men, including Bergamini, down with her. On 4th place is located French battleship Richelieu. Richelieu was fast battleship, the lead ship of the Richelieu class, built as a response to the Italian Littorio class. The Richelieus were based on their immediate predecessors of the Dunkirk class with the same unconventional arrangement that grouped their main battery forward in 2 quadruple gun turrets. They were scaled up to accommodate a much more powerful main battery of 8 380mm guns, with increased armor to protect them from guns of the same caliber. Richelieu was laid down in 1935 and was launched in 1939, just before the outbreak of World War II in Europe. As war with Germany became increasingly likely, work on the ship was rushed to prepare her for commissioning in April 1940. Completed just days before the Germans won the Battle of France in June, Richelieu fled to Dakar in French West Africa to keep her under French control. There, she came under repeated British attacks that had been intended to either compel the battleship to join the Free French Naval Forces or sink her. These included during Operation Catapult in July 1940 and the Battle of Dakar in September, damaged in both attacks. The ship was slowly repaired before eventually being turned over to Free French control after the Allied invasion of North Africa in November 1942. After being sent to the United States for repairs and an extensive modernization, the ship served with the British Home Fleet in early 1944 before being deployed to the Eastern Fleet for operations against the Japanese in the Indian Ocean. These included several bombardment operations, and in May 1945 she was present during the Battle of the Malacca Strait, though she was too far away to engage the Japanese ships before they were sunk. Richelieu was part of the force that liberated Singapore after the Japanese surrender in September, and she later operated in French Indochina as part of the initial effort to restore French colonial rule. Recalled to France in December 1945, she was repaired and modernized slightly in 1946. The ship saw relatively limited training in the immediate post-war years, and, in 1952, she was removed from active service for use as a gunnery training ship. In 1956, she was placed in reserve and was thereafter used as a stationary training vessel and barracks ship until 1967, when the French Navy decided to discard her. She was sold for scrap in 1968 and broken up in Italy from 1968 to 1969. The top 3 leaders opens Bismarck. Bismarck was the first of 2 Bismarck-class battleships built for Nazi Germany's Kriegsmarine, named after Chancellor Otto von Bismarck. The ship was laid down at the Blohm and Voss shipyard in Hamburg in July 1936 and launched in February 1939. Work was completed in August 1940, when she was commissioned into the German fleet. Bismarck and her sister ship Tirpitz were the largest battleships ever built by Germany, and two of the largest built by any European power. In the course of the warship's 8-month career under her sole commanding officer, Captain Ernst Lindemann, Bismarck conducted only one offensive operation, lasting 8 days in May 1941, codenamed Regenbow. The ship, along with the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen, was to break into the Atlantic Ocean and raid Allied shipping from North America to Great Britain. The two ships were detected several times off Scandinavia, and British naval units were deployed to block their route. At the Battle of the Denmark Strait, the battlecruiser HMS Hood initially engaged Prince Eugen, probably by mistake, while HMS Prince of Wales engaged Bismarck. In the ensuing battle, Hood was destroyed by the combined fire of Bismarck and Prince Eugen, which then damaged Prince of Wales and forced her retreat. Bismarck suffered sufficient damage from 3 hits to force an end to the raiding mission. The destruction of Hood spurred a relentless pursuit by the Royal Navy involving dozens of warships. 2 days later, heading for occupied France to effect repairs, Bismarck was attacked by 16 Fairey Swordfish biplane torpedo bombers from the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal. One scored a hit that rendered the battleship's steering gear inoperable. In her final battle the following morning, the already crippled Bismarck was engaged by 2 British battleships and 2 heavy cruisers, and sustained incapacitating damage and heavy loss of life. The ship was scuttled to prevent her being boarded by the British, and to allow the ship to be abandoned so as to limit further casualties. Most experts agree that the battle damage would have caused her to sink eventually. The wreck was located in June 1989 by Robert Ballard, and has since been further surveyed by several other expeditions. A detailed underwater survey of the wreck in 2002 showed that the sustained close-range shelling was largely ineffective in the effort to sink the ship. The many torpedoes launched at Bismarck were also almost completely ineffective, and the massive plating of the armor deck was also found to be virtually intact. Second place. Iowa. Iowa is a retired battleship, the lead ship of her class, and the 4th in the United States Navy to be named after the state of Iowa. Owing to the cancellation of the Montana-class battleships, Iowa is the last lead ship of any class of United States battleships and was the only ship of her class to serve in the Atlantic Ocean during World War II. During World War II, she carried President Franklin D. Roosevelt across the Atlantic to Mers el Kebir, Algeria, en route to a conference of vital importance in 1943 in Tehran with Prime Minister Winston Churchill of the United Kingdom and Joseph Stalin, leader of the Soviet Union. When transferred to the Pacific Fleet in 1944, Iowa shelled beachheads at Kwajalein and Eniwetok in advance of Allied amphibious landings and screened aircraft carriers operating in the Marshall Islands. She also served as the 3rd Fleet flagship, flying Admiral William F. Halsey's flag at the Japanese surrender in Tokyo Bay. During the Korean War, Iowa was involved in raids on the North Korean coast, after which she was decommissioned into the United States Navy Reserve Fleets, better known as the Mothball Fleet. She was reactivated in 1984 as part of the 600-ship Navy plan and operated in both the Atlantic and Pacific fleets to counter the recently expanded Soviet Navy. In April 1989, an explosion of undetermined origin wrecked 2-gun turret, killing 47 sailors. Iowa was decommissioned for the last time in October 1990 after 19 total years of active service, and was initially stricken from the Naval Vessel Register in 1995. Before being reinstated from 1999 to 2006 to comply with federal laws that required retention and maintenance of 2 Iowa-class battleships. In 2011, Iowa was donated to the Los Angeles-based nonprofit Pacific Battleship Center and was permanently moved to Berth 87 at the Port of Los Angeles in 2012, where she was opened to the public as the Iowa Museum. Number 1. Yamato. Yamato was the lead ship of her class of battleships built for the Imperial Japanese Navy shortly before World War II. She and her sister ship, Musashi, were the heaviest and most powerfully armed battleships ever constructed, displacing 72,800 tons at full load and armed with 946 cm Type 94 main guns, which were the largest guns ever mounted on a warship. Named after the ancient Japanese Yamato province, Yamato was designed to counter the numerically superior battleship fleet of the United States, Japan's main rival in the Pacific. She was laid down in 1937 and formally commissioned a week after the Pearl Harbor attack in late 1941. Throughout 1942, she served as the flagship of the combined fleet, and in June 1942 Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto directed the fleet from her bridge during the Battle of Midway, a disastrous defeat for Japan. Musashi took over as the combined fleet flagship in early 1943, and Yamato spent the rest of the year moving between the major Japanese naval bases of Truk and Kure in response to American threats. In December 1943, Yamato was torpedoed by an American submarine, which necessitated repairs at Kure, where she would also be refitted with additional anti-aircraft guns and radar in early 1944. Although present at the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, she played no part in the battle. The only time Yamato fired her main guns at enemy surface targets was in October 1944, when she was sent to engage American forces invading the Philippines during the Battle of Lake Gulf. While threatening to sink American troop transports, they encountered a light escort carrier group of the U.S. Navy's Task Force 77, Taffy 3, in the battle off Samar. The Japanese turned back after American air attacks convinced them they were engaging a powerful U.S. carrier fleet. During 1944, the balance of naval power in the Pacific decisively turned against Japan, and by early 1945, its fleet was much depleted and badly hobbled by critical fuel shortages in the home islands. In a desperate attempt to slow the Allied advance, Yamato was dispatched on a one-way mission to Okinawa in April 1945, with orders to beach herself and fight until destroyed, thus protecting the island. The task force was spotted south of Kyushu by U.S. submarines and aircraft, and on the 7th of April 1945 she was sunk by American carrier-based bombers and torpedo bombers with the loss of most of her crew. That's all. Thank you for watching this video. Leave your comments, subscribe, and see you again. Good luck!